The evening air outside the old city theater felt calm, almost peaceful, as people slowly walked inside for the charity concert. The building wasn't huge or fancy, but it had charm-soft lights, wooden doors, and posters of past events hanging on the walls. Inside, the seats filled quickly. Families, students, older couples, and music lovers from all around the city had gathered because a well-known pianist was performing there for one night only. For many, it was a rare chance to hear him live. He wasn't just famous for his talent, but also for the warmth he brought to the stage. People said his music could make you feel things you didn't even know were inside you. Some said he played not with his hands, but with his heart. And that night, the audience was ready to experience exactly that. As the lights dimmed, soft whispers drifted through the hall. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting. A moment later, the pianist walked onto the stage to loud applause. He smiled politely, bowed, and took his seat at the grand piano. For a second, the entire hall went silent, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then he began to play. The first song was gentle, almost like a conversation between the notes. The music flowed softly, touching the walls and filling every corner of the hall. Some people closed their eyes. Others simply watched his hands move with incredible ease. It felt like he wasn't even trying, the music just came alive on its own. The second song was stronger, full of energy and excitement. A few people nodded their heads to the rhythm. Others whispered to each other in admiration. The pianist performed as if he was telling a story, and the audience followed every moment with complete attention. He was halfway through the concert when something unexpected happened. After finishing a lively piece, he paused. Instead of immediately starting the next song, he turned toward the audience and smiled in a thoughtful way. People wondered what he was about to say. He took a small breath, then spoke into the microphone in a calm, friendly voice. "I want to try something different tonight," he said. "Music is not just about performing. It is about connecting. And sometimes, the best moments happen when they are not planned." The audience shifted in their seats, curious. He continued, "So tonight, I want to invite someone from the audience to join me on stage. A random person. Anyone who feels brave enough to sit here at this piano, even just for a few moments." Gasps and small laughs filled the hall. Some people looked around, wondering if this was part of the show. Others whispered, "He's joking, right?" But the pianist wasn't joking. His expression showed he was serious. He slowly scanned the audience, moving his eyes from one section to another. Some people straightened their backs, hoping he would notice them. Others lowered their heads, praying he wouldn't. Then his eyes stopped on someone, a woman sitting quietly around the middle rows. She wasn't dressed in anything flashy, and she wasn't talking to anyone. She sat with her hands in her lap, looking completely unprepared for attention. Yet the pianist pointed gently in her direction. "You," he said softly, as if he didn't want to scare her. "Would you like to come up?" The woman froze. People around her turned to look at her. Some smiled encouragingly. Others giggled nervously. She seemed surprised, almost shocked, like someone who suddenly found a spotlight shining directly on them. At first, she didn't move. It was clear she wasn't expecting this moment at all. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked down at her hands, as if asking herself what to do. The pianist gave her a reassuring smile from the stage. "You don't have to," he added kindly. "Only if you want." The hall became silent again. The woman took a slow breath. No one knew whether she would agree or refuse. But after a few long seconds, she gently stood up. A soft wave of murmurs moved across the audience. She walked carefully down the row, trying not to step on anyone's feet or bump into seats. Her face looked nervous, but she was trying to stay calm. She reached the aisle, and a staff member led her toward the stage stairs. The entire room watched her. Some people whispered, "Maybe she knows how to play." Others said, "What if she doesn't?" A few thought this might be staged, but most could tell by her unsure steps that she didn't expect to be up there. When she climbed the steps, her hands slightly trembled. The lights were brighter on stage, making everything feel more intense. The pianist moved aside courteously, giving her space. She walked to the center and stood beside him. He greeted her with a gentle nod. "Thank you for being brave," he said in a soft voice that the audience could still hear. She smiled politely, though a little stiffly, showing she was trying her best to handle the moment. Her heart seemed to beat fast. You could almost see it in the way her shoulders rose with each careful breath. The pianist asked kindly, "Do you play any instrument?" She hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like she would say no. Her lips parted slightly, but the words stayed inside. She looked away, then back at the piano, then back at him. The audience leaned closer. The hall was so quiet that the hum of the stage lights felt louder. Finally, she answered in a soft voice, "I used to. A long time ago." A few people in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. The pianist didn't push her. He simply smiled with understanding. "Well," he said, "if you feel comfortable, you can sit. No pressure. Just do what you feel is right." He stepped aside, letting her approach the piano. She walked toward the bench slowly, like someone approaching something sacred. She touched the edge of the piano lightly. It's almost as if reconnecting with an old memory. Then she sat down. Her posture was careful and uncertain. She looked at the keys, her fingers hovering but not touching. The entire audience watched her, waiting to see what she would do. The pianist stood nearby, giving her space yet supporting her silently. She took another deep breath, longer this time. Her fingers relaxed slightly. The room felt still, the kind of stillness before something important happens. People whispered, but very quietly, "What will she play? Does she really know?" She looked so nervous, but no one mocked her. Everyone sensed something sincere, something vulnerably in the moment. She slowly lifted her hands, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and closed her eyes. The hall became absolutely silent. Seconds felt like minutes as everyone waited for a sound. A note, anything. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders softened. Her hands stopped shaking. It was as if she was trying to remember a part of herself she hadn't touched in years. And then she pressed the first key. A single note echoed softly across the hall. Gentle, quiet, but steady. Then came another note, and another. The audience leaned forward instinctively. Sensing that something special might be about to happen, her fingers moved a little more confidently, forming a simple pattern at first, soft, unsure, like someone rediscovering a forgotten language. The pianist watched her with thoughtful curiosity. The woman continued playing. The melody was slow, but warm. People could feel something emotional behind her touch. It wasn't just sound. It was a feeling, a memory, maybe even a story she had held inside for a long time. Her hands moved more smoothly now. Her breathing steadied. The audience didn't know who she was. They didn't know her past, her dreams, or her reasons. But in that moment, they could feel that this wasn't just random. Something deeper was happening. Something real. It was supposed to be a simple moment, just a guest on stage. But the way the woman's fingers slowly began to dance on the keys made it clear. This was only the beginning. Asterisk. The woman sat at the piano bench with her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The audience watched her with complete silence, almost unsure if she would continue playing or stop right there. The first few notes she had played were soft, gentle, almost like someone testing the temperature of water before diving in. But now her hands hovered over the keys again, and everyone waited for what she would do next. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer. Maybe it helped her focus. Maybe it helped her calm her racing heart. Maybe it helped her go back into some old memory she didn't want to lose. Whatever the reason, the hall remained still, as if respecting her moment. Then, slowly, she pressed the next set of keys. This time, the notes were a little fuller, a little clearer. Her hands moved with more intention. It wasn't perfect. She hesitated here and there, but the melody began to form into something recognizable. People leaned forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on her fingers. They didn't know what she was playing, but they could hear the emotions behind each note. The pianist stood a few feet away, watching her closely. His eyebrows lifted slightly, not out of judgment, but curiosity. It was clear that even he didn't expect her to play this way. He had invited her just to create a fun moment, something simple to make the audience smile. But now, it seemed like something more meaningful was unfolding. The woman's breathing became steady. Her shoulders relaxed. Her fingers moved with slow confidence. She wasn't playing loud or fast. It wasn't a show-off moment. It felt personal. It's almost like she was sharing a piece of her heart with a room full of strangers. People in the audience exchanged quiet glances. No one whispered now. They didn't want to break the atmosphere that was building. A few people tilted their heads, trying to figure out what piece she was playing. Others simply let the soft music wash over them. The melody flowed gently, like water running over smooth stones. It wasn't something grand or powerful. It was simple, delicate, but full of emotion. And somehow, it felt more real than anything they had heard earlier that night. The pianist stepped a little closer, not to interrupt, but to listen more carefully. The woman's hands moved as though they remembered something her mind had forgotten long ago. Her fingers traced familiar patterns, sometimes pausing, sometimes gliding, searching for the next notes. People could tell she wasn't a beginner. She wasn't someone touching a piano for the first time. Her touch had history. It had memories. It had depth. After a minute, the notes grew slightly bolder. Her hands started moving more smoothly. Her left hand joined in, adding a soft harmony beneath the main melody. It was like listening to someone slowly rediscover a lost voice. The audience felt it too. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her chest. An older man wiped the corner of his eye, though he pretended it was just something irritating him. A young boy sitting next to his mother whispered, "She's good." And his mother nodded without looking away from the stage. The woman playing didn't smile. She didn't look around. She was somewhere deeper, somewhere inside the music. It was clear that she wasn't thinking about the audience or the lights or the pressure. She was thinking about something else entirely, something only she knew. But then, her fingers suddenly paused. The melody stopped halfway. She opened her eyes slowly, as if she had just returned from a faraway place. The audience held its breath. No one dared to make a sound. The pianist watched her gently, waiting to see if she would stop or continue. Her hands lifted slightly from the keys, unsure. For a moment, she looked like she might pull them away and stand up. She bit her lower lip, her eyes lowering again in uncertainty. It felt like she was fighting with herself, one part, wanting to continue. The other scared of making a mistake or being judged. The pianist leaned a little closer and spoke softly so only she could hear, though the audience could sense the kindness in his tone. "You're doing well," he said. "Take your time." His words were simple, but they seemed to help. The woman took a deep breath, closed her eyes again, and placed her fingers gently back on the keys. Then she played again. This time, the melody grew richer. Her fingers danced across the keys more confidently. The room filled with soft, warm sound. People forgot they were watching a random moment. It felt like a planned performance now, something meaningful and emotional. The pianist smiled quietly, not out of pride, but admiration. He hadn't expected this. No one had. The woman's playing grew a little more complex. She added small flourishes, little touches that showed she had once practiced this piece many times. Her hands moved with memories rather than conscious thought. Even her posture changed. She sat straighter, more comfortably, as if she was returning to something familiar. Minutes passed, but it didn't feel long. The music carried the room like a gentle breeze. It wasn't flawless. Occasionally she hesitated or hit a note a little unevenly, but those small imperfections made it feel even more human, more real, and that was why the audience loved it. Somewhere near the back, a man whispered softly, "Maybe she used to be a pianist." A few heads nodded slowly, agreeing. It certainly looked that way. Her skill wasn't that of a beginner. It wasn't random. It had depth and history behind it, but the woman didn't look proud or confident. She looked emotional, as if each note meant something important to her, as if each sound was connected to a memory she had kept locked away. Near the middle of the melody, she paused again. Her fingers lifted slightly. Her shoulders trembled just a little. She wasn't scared, she seemed moved by her own playing. The pianist stepped behind her gently, without interrupting. His presence felt supportive, like he wanted to stand with her in this emotional moment rather than take the spotlight away. The audience watched the two of them, one rediscovering her old gift, the other quietly witnessing it. It was rare to see such a real, vulnerable moment in a public setting, and that was exactly what made the hall feel so full. Even though no one was speaking, the woman looked down at the keys, almost unsure again. She pressed a chord softly, just one. It rang through the hall like a gentle whisper. Her breathing softened again. Then she began playing the second part of the melody. The music rose slightly, like a quiet wave. Her left hand played steady, grounding notes while her right hand danced lightly, bringing emotion to the piece. She wasn't thinking anymore. She wasn't hesitating. She was simply playing like someone who had finally remembered who they once were. The audience watched in awe. Her movements weren't flashy or dramatic. She didn't sway or exaggerate her expressions, but you could feel every emotion through her fingers. You could sense the years of silence she had carried. You could feel the weight of her memories, her past, her lost dreams, whatever they were. A quiet tear rolled down her cheek, though she didn't wipe it away. She kept playing, letting the emotions flow through her hands instead of her voice. The pianist watched with deep respect. He could have stopped her earlier. He could have ended the moment or taken over, but he didn't. Something about her playing deserved space. Something about her emotion deserved to be heard. The woman continued until the final notes drifted softly into the air. They hung there for a moment, delicate and trembling, like a feather floating in the wind. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The hall was completely silent. No applause, no whispers. Just a deep, emotional stillness. It wasn't because people didn't like it. It was because they were moved, truly moved, and they needed a moment to breathe again. The woman sat quietly, her hands still trembling slightly, her eyes lowered. She looked as if she wasn't sure what would happen next, but everyone in the audience already knew one thing. This random woman. She was no ordinary guest. She had a story that the piano had only begun to reveal. The final note she played still hung lightly in the air, almost as if it didn't want to fade away. For a few seconds, the entire hall remained frozen. No one moved. No one clapped. It wasn't because they were unsure. It was because they were too moved to react. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of emotion. It carried the weight of something deep, something unexpected. On stage, the woman kept her hands on her lap. Her fingers were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the feelings that the music had pulled out of her. She stared down at the piano, almost afraid to look at the audience. Her heart was beating fast, but it wasn't the nervous, shaky feeling she had earlier. It was something else, something she hadn't felt in years. The pianist stood quietly behind her. He wasn't rushing to speak. He wasn't rushing to take back the spotlight. He simply watched her with genuine respect. He had seen hundreds of people play the piano, but something about this moment felt different. This woman wasn't performing for fame or applause. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was playing as if each note carried a part of her life, something she had hidden away for a long time. Finally, the silence broke not with applause, but with a soft gasp from someone in the crowd. It was the kind of sound people make when something touches them so deeply they can't hold it inside. That single sound seemed to unlock the rest of the room. Slowly, quietly, people began to clap. It started gently, almost shyly. Then it grew louder and louder. Soon, the entire hall was clapping, some even standing on their feet. The woman lifted her head slightly, confused at first. She wasn't used to such loud appreciation. She looked around, her eyes scanning the faces in the audience. She saw smiles, teary eyes, warm expressions. She saw people who weren't cheering just because she played well. They were cheering because they felt something from her music. She blinked quickly, but a tear still escaped from the corner of her eye. The pianist stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, letting her know she wasn't alone on the stage. The applause continued, echoing through the hall like waves of warmth. The woman let out a shaky breath. She wasn't prepared for this reaction. She wasn't expecting anything. She had only meant to touch the keys for a moment, maybe play a few simple notes. She had no idea her music would touch the entire room. When the clapping finally softened, the pianist leaned down slightly and spoke to her in a calm voice that the microphone picked up. "That was beautiful," he said. "You have a gift." She smiled shyly and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I haven't played in a long time," she replied softly, almost whispering. The pianist nodded gently. "It didn't feel like that. It felt like the music knew you." A quiet, emotional laugh escaped her, and she looked down, embarrassed but grateful. The audience could sense the sincerity between them. The pianist stepped aside and motioned for her to stand. The woman hesitated. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but she slowly rose from the bench. The audience clapped again, this time even more warmly. She lowered her head respectfully, not knowing what else to do. But the pianist wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd and raised his hand slightly, signaling for quiet. When the hall settled again, he looked back at the woman and asked gently, "Do you know what piece you just played?" She shook her head slowly. I only remember parts of it. I used to practice it when I was young." The pianist took a thoughtful breath. "You played it with emotion more than technique. That's rare." Soft murmur floated through the crowd. Many people nodded, agreeing with his words. They could feel the emotion in her playing. The woman took another breath, trying to steady herself. "I didn't mean to play that much. I thought I would just try a few notes." "And look what happened," the pianist replied warmly. "You filled this hall with something special." His tone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was genuine, simple, and respectful. The woman looked down again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I could still play like that," the pianist smiled. "Sometimes music remembers us even when we forget it." The audience loved that line. They clapped softly again, but something inside the woman changed at that moment. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she could feel it. It was as if a heavy door inside her had been opened. She had spent years turning away from the piano, convincing herself that chapter of her life was over. But the sound she created tonight reminded her of who she used to be in, maybe. Who she could still be. The pianist stepped toward the piano and lightly touched the top, then looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "Would you like to play more?" he asked gently. The woman's eyes widened immediately. She shook her head quickly. No, I can't do that." "I already played too much." "You didn't play too much," he said kindly. "You played just enough." She laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that comes from being overwhelmed. "No, really, I can't." He didn't pressure her. Instead, he approached the piano bench again and sat on one side, leaving space for her. He placed his hand softly on the keys, but didn't press anything. "How about this?" he suggested. "We play something together." The audience leaned forward, excited at the idea. A duet. A moment shared between the professional and the unexpected talented guest. The woman blinked, unsure. Her heart raced again. It wasn't fear this time. It was something like excitement mixed with disbelief. "I don't know if I can follow," she admitted. "I haven't practiced with anyone in years." "You don't have to follow," the pianist said with a gentle smile. "Just play with me. I'll guide you." She hesitated for a moment. The crowd watched quietly, waiting to see what she would choose. Finally, the woman took a slow breath, as if gathering courage, and sat down beside him. The bench felt different this time, not like a place of fear, but something familiar and welcoming. The pianist nodded and began playing a simple, soft pattern. The notes floated gently, leaving space for her to join. It wasn't a difficult piece. It was something calming, something almost peaceful. She listened for a moment, letting the rhythm wash over her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, waiting for the right moment. And then she joined in. The first notes she played blended perfectly with his. They weren't loud. They weren't bold. But they fit. The audience smiled, some even whispering little sounds of delight. The pianist added more layers, keeping the melody steady so she wouldn't get lost. The woman followed him, matching the flow, feeling the music instead of thinking about it. Her shoulders relaxed. Her fingers warmed up. Her breath softened again. Together, they created something beautiful, not a performance full of showmanship, but a moment full of connection. Their hands moved side by side, sometimes close, sometimes apart. Their melodies intertwined like two voices telling a shared story. She wasn't competing with him. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply playing freely, calmly, honestly, halfway through the duet. The pianist looked at her and gave a small nod, encouraging her to take the lead for a moment. She looked surprised, but her fingers didn't hesitate. She added a small flourish, a gentle run of notes that made a few people in the audience gasp softly. It wasn't flashy, it was heartfelt. The pianist smiled proudly. The music continued, building gently, then softening again like waves rising and falling. People watched with complete attention. It wasn't every day they saw a moment like this, something real, something unscripted, something that touched every heart in the room. When the final notes drifted into silence, the entire audience rose to their feet instantly. Applause thundered through the hall, loud and heartfelt. People cheered, clapped, even whistled. The sound echoed everywhere. The woman covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. She couldn't believe what she had just been part of. The pianist rose and gave a small bow to the audience, but then stepped aside and gestured proudly toward the woman. The crowd clapped even louder, celebrating her moment. It wasn't just applause for music. It was applause for courage, for rediscovered passion, for a woman who had stepped out of her shadow and touched hundreds of hearts, and this was only the beginning of a story she didn't even know she was still living. The applause slowly faded, but the warmth in the hall remained. People were still standing, many smiling through tears, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a performance, it felt like the uncovering of something hidden, something precious. The woman stood there on stage, overwhelmed. She kept her hands close to her chest, as if holding on to the feeling the music had given her. She had never expected anything like this to happen tonight. She came to the concert just to listen, to escape her thoughts for a little while. And yet, she ended up sharing a piece of her heart with hundreds of strangers. The pianist waited next to her, giving her space. He didn't rush to speak, knowing she needed a moment to take everything in. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were full of emotion, confusion, surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that even she couldn't describe. He smiled gently. "Are you all right?" She let out a shaky laugh. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied warmly. "Your music already did." The crowd continued clapping softly, as if encouraging her to breathe, to settle, to understand that this moment was hers. After a minute, the pianist turned toward the audience. "I think we all want to know," he said in a soft voice. "Where did she learn to play like that?" The woman swallowed hard. She looked down at the piano, then back up at the rows and rows of people staring at her with kind eyes. She wasn't used to speaking in front of a crowd, but something inside her urged her to share, at least a small part of her story. She stepped toward the microphone slowly. "Learned to play when I was a child," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My father used to bring home old music books. I would sit for hours trying to follow the notes. Back then, the piano was everything to me." The audience listened quietly. "I dreamed of becoming a performer," she continued. "I wanted to travel, to play music for people, to live inside the notes." Her voice softened at the end of that sentence, as if remembering a younger version of herself she hadn't thought about in years. "But life doesn't always go the way we plan," she said gently. "Things changed. I had responsibilities. I had family to take care of. I had work to do. And slowly I stopped playing. I told myself I didn't have time anymore, that it didn't matter." She closed her eyes briefly, remembering the years she had ignored the piano sitting quietly in the corner of her home, and eventually, she whispered, "I convinced myself that part of my life was gone forever." Sad but understanding silence settled over the hall. People nodded slowly, recognizing the feeling of lost dreams, of passions forgotten because life demanded other things. "I haven't touched a piano properly in years," she added. "But tonight, something inside me said I should try again. Just for a moment." The pianist smiled at her with deep respect. And what a moment it became, he said warmly. The audience clapped again. Not loudly this time, but softly like an embrace made of sound. The woman wiped her eyes gently. She wasn't embarrassed about the tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of relief, of remembering something she thought she had lost forever. The pianist turned toward her once more. I'm glad you said yes, he told her kindly. You didn't just play notes tonight. You reminded all of us why music matters. She looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't fully express, but the evening wasn't over yet. The pianist stepped toward the microphone again. I have an idea, he said to the audience. If she is comfortable, how about we close the night with a final piece together? One more moment to honor her return to music. The crowd erupted into gentle cheers, supportive and warm. The woman's eyes widened. Oh no, I can't, he cut her off softly. Only if you feel ready, and only if you want to. There is no pressure at all. She looked at the piano, then at the audience, then back at him. Her heart beat fast, not with fear, but with possibility. For so many years she had believed her chance was gone. But maybe it usn't. After a long breath, she nodded lightly. Okay, she whispered. One more, the audience cheered. She sat down again, this time without trembling. The pianist joined her on the bench, and for a moment the stage lights shone softly over the two of them. One, a professional. The other, someone rediscovering a long-lost part of her soul. He whispered quietly, We'll play something simple. You lead. Her eyebrows lifted. Me, yes, he smiled. Trust yourself, she hesitated, then placed her hands on the keys. The first notes she played were soft, warm, and full of emotion. The pianist joined after a few seconds, weaving his melody around hers like two old friends. Meeting again after years apart, this piece was different from the first. It wasn't sad or heavy. It was gentle, hopeful, almost like sunlight slowly entering a quiet room. Her hands were confident now, moving with grace she didn't know she still had. She wasn't just remembering old skills, she was reclaiming them. The pianist supported her, matching her flow, adding harmonies that lifted her melody even higher. Together, they created a peaceful, healing sound that filled the hall. The audience listened with soft smiles, their hearts warmed by the beauty of the moment. Some held hands, some closed their eyes. Others simply watched, touched by the calmness in the music, as the piece neared its end. She added a delicate, emotional flourish, a few extra notes that came straight from her heart. It wasn't planned. It wasn't practiced. But it fit perfectly. The pianist glanced at her, impressed. She smiled shyly, losing herself in the final gentle notes. When the last sound faded, the audience erupted into applause once more, louder than before. People stood again, clapping until their hands hurt. They weren't just celebrating music, they were celebrating her courage, her rediscovery, her story. The woman stood from the bench, breathless, emotional, overwhelmed. The pianist bowed, then stepped aside and motioned toward her for the audience to applaud even louder. She shook her head with humble disbelief, covering her mouth with her hand as tears filled her eyes again. After the applause finally calmed, the pianist leaned toward her and said softly, You should play again. Not just tonight, but in your life. She looked at him, her voice trembling. Do you really think so? I don't think, he answered with a kind smile. I know. A long pause followed. The woman looked at the piano, really looked at it like seeing an old friend she had missed for years. She nodded slowly. Maybe I will. The pianist squeezed her hand gently. I hope you do. As she stepped off the stage, the audience gave her a final round of applause. People reached out to her, telling her she inspired them, thanking her for her music, praising her courage. She didn't know how to respond to everything, but her smile said more than words. Outside the theater, the night air felt cool and comforting. She walked slowly, letting the emotions settle. She felt lighter, freer, like a weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. She would sit at her old piano again. She would dust it off, open the lid, and let her fingers find their way. Not because she wanted fame or attention, but because music lived inside her. It always had. And tonight reminded her that a dream may fall asleep, but it never truly dies.